Breaking news out of Washington. The House Oversight Committee just received files from the estate of Jeffrey Epstein. A Democratic spokesperson says committee Democrats are reviewing hundreds of documents handed over to the committee, and they have just released that body drawing allegedly drawn by President Trump for Epstein's 50th birthday. Here it is. The Wall Street Journal was first to report on it a few months ago, and today we're getting a first look at it. Joining us now, staff writer for The Atlantic and MSNBC political contributor Mark Leibovich, the Bulwark senior reporter Will Sommer, host of the Bulwark podcast, and an MSNBC political analyst, Tim Miller. Mark, I know you are thrilled and honored to be on the show today to get a first glimpse of this.
You know, it's happening in real time. First of all, I'm always thrilled and honored to be on the show, Katie. This is, I mean, we've had the wording on this before. We've sort of had a general sort of contours of what this is before. This is actually sort of the physical. This is actually it. We are seeing this. It's unclear whether the needle will move any more than it already has. But obviously, look, I mean, Donald Trump has said that this doesn't exist. This, what I can tell, looks like it exists. So start with that. We'll see, you know, if this propels the story any faster, any greater time than it will, although I suspect that there will be other things that we didn't know before that are going to be coming out in the probably next few days.
Will, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the letter that has all the stuff about, you know, secrets and ages not changing, things like that. I mean, so I think it's great to see it. The sort of instant reaction I'm seeing from right-wing media, they're really focusing a lot on the signature, saying, oh, you know, Charlie Kirk, for example, is saying, that doesn't really look like Trump's signature. It looks just like Trump's signature. I mean, if you pull up what Trump's signature looks like, it looks pretty much exactly like that. So, you know, I think this is going to keep the story going, the Epstein story that Trump has obviously tried to avoid. You know, that and Mike Johnson claiming and now backing off the idea that Trump was some sort of FBI informant against Epstein. I think the story is sort of turning against the administration once again. Yeah,
I mean, I am pulling up Donald Trump's signature right now, and gosh, the D is exactly the same. I mean, I don't know. Listen, I'm not a handwriting expert, but this was in the birthday book. The Wall Street Journal reports that he submitted it. Donald Trump denies it. It's just a weird thing, Tim, it's a weird hill to die on. I did not write that letter. I did not draw that picture. We all know they were friends. It's been documented that they were friends. Why are they so concerned about admitting that Donald Trump sent him an image like this? It's not like no one knows that Donald Trump himself is body.
Yeah, well, I think it's their instinct to lie, for starters. Was when they're presented with inconvenient information, it's easier for them to talk about the fake news and blame the fake news than actually engage on the merits. On this one in particular, I mean, it is true that it's not known that Donald Trump was body. But there is this mythos that Will could talk about for sure on the right, on some on the MAGA right and the QAnon right, that Trump was like fighting against, you know, the elite pedophile rings out there, and that he was, you know, some warrior on the inside who was going to expose all these people. And now here he is, not only not exposing them all, but writing this note to Epstein here that is just extremely familiar, right? Like it's one thing, it is true that famous people sometimes sign birthday cards for people or sign generic notes for people. That is not what we're seeing here. I mean, we have this drawing of what appears to be a young woman, I would say, and Donald Trump talking about how they share certain things in common, about how they have all these wonderful secrets together. I mean, it's a letter from two guys that get in trouble together and have a bromance. That's what this is. It's not some generic letter. And so I think that's why they probably are more sensitive about it, because it's not as if it's just two famous people getting their picture together at another famous person's party.
Yeah,
it's more intimate.
I hear you on that. But I don't think would it be surprising that Donald Trump wrote something like this to one of his friends? No, even if that friend did turn out to be a creep, I'm not sure it would be surprising. I don't know if that inherently means that Donald Trump himself is also engaging in the same behavior. He was interacting with lots of people. I think making that jump is easier to do if the person is being cagey about it and strange and not admitting to just some obvious things. When you're not saying, yeah, I wrote this, I did do this picture. No, it's not me. Somebody else drew it. It's not my signature. When it looks exactly like your signature, that starts to raise more questions. But I want to linger on what Tim said a moment ago about the right canonizing Donald Trump as the figure who was going to expose all of this. Speaker Mike Johnson had this very weird moment on Friday where he suggested that Donald Trump was actually an FBI informant against Jeffrey Epstein. He was the one that tipped off the FBI back in the early 2000s. He walked that back and cleaned it up a bit in a statement today, but it just was out there for 3 or 4 days out there in the press. Where does that come from, this idea that Donald Trump was the one? By the way, we had Tom Winter on earlier today. He's reviewed the documents, and the initial tip came from, according to the government documents, came from the family members of some of the girls who were victimized.
I don't know if that was for me or
Will. I'm sending that to you. I'm sorry, Will.
Oh, sure,
it was a big windup.
Sure. So in this case, I mean, look, conspiracy theorists, QAnon believers, Trump supporters have had a problem for a long time, which is how do you square Donald Trump's friendship with this, convicted charged sex trafficker and pedophile, all these things, convicted pedophile. And what they came up with was, well, maybe Trump was kind of going in on the inside to expose Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe he made Alex Acosta, the prosecutor who gave Epstein a sweetheart deal. Maybe he put him in the cabinet to draw attention to how awful this deal was. So they kind of exist in this alternate universe. And that's only gotten worse since Trump tried to close the Epstein case along with Pam Bondi. And so, again, it's bizarre to me that this has reached the point where the Speaker of the House is now saying, well, maybe Trump is an FBI informant. Maybe he was working to take down Epstein. But really, I mean, they're grasping at straws because, as you said, Katie, the whole thing is really weird. The idea that Trump was friends with this notorious pedophile, and all of a sudden his administration is doing everything they can to stop this discussion about it.
Yeah, I guess if you're innocent, why do you protest so much about it? Why do you claim that you're not involved in any way? Why is this not your signature? We've seen the images. We've seen them partying together. Donald Trump has given quotes to magazines about the kind of guy that Jeffrey Epstein was. It's all been out there, Mark.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the protest too much thing is a close cousin to what Tim just said about, the line comes easily, right? I mean, they're trying to convolute this. Is convolute a verb? I don't know. It is convoluted. This makes it more convoluted when you mix the FBI informant thing, which I just learned about yesterday. I guess we all just learned about it yesterday, with whatever quibbling and protesting there is about the signature, whether this is real or not. I mean, look, this is what everything we're seeing in this new document, in this letter, what we've heard about it, does not strike me, and I don't think it'll strike a lot of his supporters as out of character for Donald Trump. I mean, this is very much in line with the person that people who both love and hate him over the years have come to know. The FBI pieces, I mean, that kind of came out of left field here. But ultimately, I mean, this is part of, I think the more details, the more tortured you get into what's true, what's not true, what might be true, the conspiracy theories, the more the issue itself might sort of recede and become just a little bit too convoluted for the base to talk about, which is what's dangerous to Donald Trump, because the base sort of rebelled against him over Epstein, and we'll see where this leads from it.
I want to get you, though, Mark, on your piece today, which was, I thought, the most interesting way to talk about this, at least for the moment, which is not maybe the most interesting, but one of the interesting ways to talk about this. The Democrats, I always think you're the most interesting. The Democrats are really latching on to Epstein, and they're trying to say that anything that Donald Trump does is a distraction from Epstein. He doesn't want to talk about Epstein. He's worried about Epstein. So any move he makes, sending troops to Chicago, signing executive orders to change the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War, all of it is a distraction. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
I mean, I think it's overdone. I think it goes to the Democrats' lack of imagination. I think it sort of goes to a laziness where they, instead of making a coherent case against what Donald Trump is doing, and God knows he's giving them a lot of material to work with around, authoritarianism and what he's doing in cities and ICE and so forth, and just saying, oh, he's just trying to distract from Epstein is very, very reductive, really does no justice at all to the issues involved. And yes, the Epstein story is extremely problematic to Trump potentially and to Republicans on down. But I also think, enough already. They actually have to work harder to make a case that is actually going to drive, the kind of support and bring them out of the wilderness that they have not been in for a while.
Do you see any Democrats finding a way to present an alternate idea to the American public, an alternate narrative to the American public, Mark?
I think there are some. I mean, look, I mean, the Democrats writ large are, they're in a heap of trouble around fundraising, around what's going on at the DNC, around sort of lack of confidence in their leadership, what polls are saying. But ultimately, what these sort of wilderness, phases have in common is they end when you actually recruit candidates. And Democrats, I think the good news for them coming out of all of this is that they are recruiting good candidates. They have a strong midterm, and it does look like the ruling party right now, and Donald Trump certainly might be overreaching, and they're certainly not popular either. So I do think around the economy and inflation and around things that I think Donald Trump truly is vulnerable on, they are starting to arrive at some kind of coherent message.
All right. Just to go back to this drawing and the signature, which people online are saying is not his. Screen right is an executive order. Screen left is the signature on the birthday book. So yeah, you decide whether you think that one that looks similar or not. Tim, what do you think?
They look similar to me, Katie. But here, just like circling back about how they don't really care about the brazenness of their lies. It's worth maybe remembering that the vice president, when this story first came out, when the Wall Street Journal first ran it, tweeted this: "Forgive my language, but this story is complete and utter BS." He writes it out. The Wall Street Journal should be ashamed for publishing it. Where is this letter? So, I mean, at that time, they had to know that this really existed, that it was true, but they don't care about that. They try to live one news cycle to news cycle, and they're happy to advance lies if it suits them in the moment. And I think that they will grasp for anything that will suit them now. But I don't, again, I think it's pretty clear what was happening here.
It's Texas Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who just came from that meeting of Oversight Committee Democrats.
Welcome, Congresswoman. So I'm going to repeat what I said almost 2 hours ago, and that is, when you look at that drawing, that's a drawing that boys share amongst themselves, right? So that's a relationship. That's what that speaks to. And as this thing begins to unfold even more, I think it's an important thread to keep pulling on, is that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile, had a relationship.
Oh, yeah, they were boys.
They were boys.
Like no question about it. I mean, he's the only one that's trying to kind of throw it out there and say, oh, no, it's a hoax. And no, this is Democrats. And no, he didn't say that he was a CI. But we had the speaker,
confidential informant.
The speaker told me something. No, he the one that, flipped on him. Well, how can you flip on somebody? Even though I know he's run that back. But literally, the fact that he even thought that he could, the only people that can ever flip on somebody are the people that are closest to them.
Right.
Period. Right? And so, this idea that he wasn't close to him is crazy. But I do think that it's going to be so important for us to really dig in, because what we are ascertaining is, number one, there were lots of modeling agencies that were doing things, and the modeling agency was basically a farce. And there's a lot of people that we want to talk to, and a lot of these models came from foreign countries. I'm just leave it there.
Anyone specific?
I'm going to leave it there, but I am trying to dig on a certain thread, for sure.
So that begs the question, and these new Epstein documents, is that part of your digging in and sort of unpacking a lot of that kind of information to sort of connect bigger dots to the dots we already
absolutely.
have?
So here's the thing. Obviously, this is concerning to have a potential pedophile as a president. That is concerning, right? But this is even bigger than him. I want people to understand the information that we were given about foreign governments and their participation, the information we were given about our own federal government and how high of a level we're talking about as far as them being in cahoots. We know that JP Morgan Chase ended up paying out a large settlement because they basically kind of looked the other way as there were these ridiculous wire transfers that were going by. We know that there were fake corporations that were set up. We know that, or at least we've been told that there were fake immigration documents that were put together so that women from other countries could end up over here. We know that there were allegedly fake marriages. this goes and it reeks through every single level of government. And it's one of those reasons that these survivors have been quiet for so long, right? Because literally they would walk in and they would see these pictures of Epstein with all of these powerful people from all over the world. And then he would threaten them and say, if you say anything, just know I know everybody, right? And so I think if we are going to prevent Epstein 2.0, or if Epstein 2.0 is taking place right now, I think it's important that we nip this in the bud right now and we learn what we did not know and we put some safeguards in place to prevent this type of thing from happening.
Because you're coming to this not just as a member of Congress, you're coming to someone as someone who has actually prosecuted cases. You understand how to build a case. I wonder, given that we're talking about a series of documents, some of which have been released, some of which have not, but also people who can offer information like Alex Acosta, who can tell us what went into the decision behind that sweetheart deal. As you begin to build a case, do you see the most value in the documents, or do you see the value in sort of these people who can give you firsthand testimony about what it is that happened and what it is you should be looking for?
I think that to start the case, it's the documents for me, right? Because, you know, I tell people all the time, I bring receipts, right? Like, they are irrefutable. So when we start to talk about things such as the white, like, it's about following the money. This is a big money situation. So, like, how are you going to refute this, right? Like,
transactions
the fact that,
are transactions.
exactly,
They're recorded, yeah.
Exactly. And so, like, to make it to where this is not political, to make it to where it's literally just getting down to the nitty gritty, for me, it starts with the documents. Remember, the president has said, oh, this is a Democratic hoax. And then we know that we heard from at least one survivor saying, listen, I voted for you. Like, I trusted that you really wanted to get to the bottom of this, which honestly, if you're not involved, then, like, why would you then kind of want to sweep this under the rug? So for me to get it kind of out of the political realm, I would actually want to start with the actual documents, such as the birthday book. It is what it is. Like, bro, you said there was no note to your homeboy, and we've got it, and it's kind of icky, as well as, like, who wrote that? Like, seriously, it's like second grade level.
What did you all discuss in the meeting today? Like, where do you go from here?
So we talked about, like, our upcoming hearings. We have a big markup on D.C. So we've got to deal with all the bills that are about to come through and come up with our strategy on that as well. But basically, we were kind of getting a rundown of, like, what's happening next. Like, we've been able to get some of these documents. One of the ones that was not shared by y'all, maybe y'all shared it earlier today, it's also kind of this picture, and it talked about the $22,000. And it basically says something to the effect of buying, it alluded to buying someone who had basically run their course. Like
a person.
A person.
Yeah.
We
woman.
have not yet shared that image with our audience. I'm curious, given that you have staffers going to New York to sit down with the Epstein estate on Wednesday, what is it you want them looking for in those documents?
So for them, what we expect committee staff to do is to make sure that the things that they did redact, because all we're getting is redacted documentation. And frankly, I don't think that the DOJ has actually been very forthcoming with a lot of the documents that they've given us. Obviously, we know that the early documents they gave us are basically things that we already had. But then they literally were sending us pages and everything black. I'm like, so the and A and you, that's got to be, like, redacted? Like, so this is just to make sure that these are good faith redactions, unlike what I feel like we're getting out of the DOJ. So, like, they then will explain, like, the one thing that I was just talking about, it's a picture, right? And so it's got different faces redacted. So we don't know who those people are. So now it'll be an explanation as to why is their face redacted? What are we hiding? And that kind of stuff. So at least the staff will see everything without anything kind of being blacked out.
So I want to go back to the point that you made about that Alicia raised, persons that you want to talk to versus the documents.
Yeah.
And I definitely appreciate the lawyer and you saying, okay, I want to see the receipts.
Yeah.
But then there is the conversation with the people. Do you trust the conversation you will have with Mr. Acosta? Do you expect him to be truthful?
Do I expect him to be? I don't.
Okay.
Am I hopeful that he will be? I am. I plan to be in the room. That is going to take place next Friday. And I plan to be in the room because any skilled litigator understands how to make sure you can set a trap. So I expect him to do his best to be truthful, because there are ways to ask questions that basically he may see it like there's no way they can get me on this, but it's a simple trap and it's a way that we will be able to get it. So I'd suggest that he tread very carefully and understand that truthfulness is paramount. But he is giving a deposition. So I thought it was a transcribed interview.
Right.
But a deposition means that there is the threat of perjury
Because there's an
attached.
oath taken at
Correct.
the beginning of that deposition.
Correct.
Right.
So you do that next Friday. You sit in the room. How soon is it that you can begin to disseminate whatever information it is you gather in that deposition?
So technically, our behind closed doors depots and transcribed interviews were not supposed to go out and talk about. Comer has a problem with keeping his mouth shut. So it's a matter of if Comer opens the door, then the door is open, right? So we just wait on him to go and open the door, which he typically does. But depending on what comes out, he may not. So the rules prevent us, though, unless and until there is an agreement that we release the full kind of transcribed interview or the full deposition, because people like to cherry pick. Right. And so the fullness really matters.
Will House Oversight Democrats seek to get that deposition, particularly from a cost of release, given that it's paramount of importance to the survivors and to folks like us sitting at this table?
Yeah, I think the ranking member will get with the rest of leadership and will kind of give a readout on what took place and then kind of figure out which way to go from there.
All right.
Say free! You say BC! Free!
Major protests continue against Donald Trump. We've seen more sustained protests against the first year here of this term than most modern presidents. And yet, at the same time, some of the things that Donald Trump is doing and seizing powers for are still getting backed up by the Supreme Court, which has so many Republican members. The rulings that we're seeing are against this backlash. Massive crowds in D.C., one church ringing its bells in solidarity. Staging a sit-in, meanwhile, in Missouri at the Capitol, at the U.S. Open, Donald Trump attended, the first president to do so in over 20 years, and there was clearly a mixed reaction that included audible boos. That's just one indicator from sports. Meanwhile, on the streets of Chicago, we saw signs against ICE and Trump's crackdown. An aerial view here of the protests about Trump sending in more federal troops. One sign said Trump must go now. You could see that hovering in the crowd. The Democratic governor speaking out.
It's, I believe, a nefarious plan. It's one that's been repeated over and over again by, well, tyrannical dictatorships across history, where you try to incite local population into some mayhem by sending in police or other disruptors, and then claim that there's too much mayhem on the ground, and therefore there must be troops that are sent in.
The Democrat there speaking to Jen Psaki and explaining his view of why this is nefarious. Now, there is legitimate ways to enforce immigration laws. Many countries do that. But whether this is an effort at a kind of scare tactics with ICE agents emboldened will continue under the Supreme Court, which has gone out of its way to help Trump even as he tests new powers. Just today, the Supreme Court said ICE can actually continue roving raids that had been challenged and paused by lower courts. Part of this includes what is basically the targeting of individuals based on appearance, what amounts to a type of racial profiling, no matter how you debate the wording, which usually, I want to tell you, is unconstitutional. In a 6-3 opinion, though, the court said that ICE can continue to do that for now and also allowed Trump to oust an FTC commissioner despite a federal law that prohibits presidents from doing that without cause. You take it together and you actually see something pretty rare, which is sustained street protests against a president who doesn't have any kind of good approval. He's underwater, Most people oppose him and what he's doing, even though he won an election. And yet the court is going out of its way, sometimes on a fast or emergency basis, to help the unpopular president with new powers that, remember, this MAGA court did not extend when there were Democrats in the White House. Here is Trump appointee Barrett discussing why she still doesn't think we're close to a constitutional crisis.
How will we know if we're in a constitutional crisis as American citizens? Like, what would that look like? Because honestly, if you're just a busy person going about your day and you see a lot of headlines that we're in a constitutional crisis, it's like, okay, how will we know that? What would that look like?
Well, look, I think the Constitution is alive and well. And I think that I don't know what a constitutional crisis would look like. I don't think that we are currently in a constitutional crisis.
Justices are known more for their writing than speaking extemporaneously, and that's perfectly fine. As a matter of rhetoric, if you don't know what something looks like, then how would you know if you're in it? And maybe we should all be pretty concerned about how to define the constitutional crisis if it comes so we can face it. It would certainly involve a president openly agitating to stay in office past their constitutional limits, which is something we've heard the president wants to do. We just don't know if he's going to actually try it. Your thoughts on what I mentioned, which is in normal times, the Supreme Court goes slowly. We've seen them when they want to go slow. It helped Donald Trump when they sped certain things up, but we've seen them when they choose to go slow. And so they're jumping in not to leave the lower courts the way they are, but to often override in Trump's favor, while there is a big, noticeable populist uprising against these tactics, many of which were not things that he strongly campaigned on.
Yeah, the thing is, Ari, the court can move slow, the court can move quick. They move quick when they feel like it. And many of them, not just because Trump put them on the court, but because they agree with a lot of his authoritarian tendencies, they're stepping in, whether it's through sort of pocket rulings or directly, and making things easier for him to remake the country however it is that he wants. And I think it was really telling in that last interview when Justice Barrett is like, well, I don't know if we're in a constitutional crisis or not. You know, first off, there are many scholars who can explain to her what a constitutional crisis is. But more importantly, if the weatherman can't tell me when it's raining, maybe I shouldn't trust what you have to say. And that's the situation we're in right now, where the court will have any kind of ruling that agrees with Trump.
Let's slow down on that point, because I meant what I said, that if she wasn't ready for the question and didn't have a great answer, that's not the test of a judge. In other words, if she could have a better answer and write it down in a ruling, we'd all say great. But the term constitutional crisis has become coded for, is this all messed up or not? And her interviewer was kind of saying, hey, this isn't that messed up, right? Like, don't believe the hype. It's not a constitutional crisis. And then she says, I don't know, but yeah, it's not. And so, of course, that itself is concerning, because there being guardrails shouldn't be coded for anything other than enforce the guardrail. I don't care what party the president is. If AOC is elected and says that her, quasi-socialist agenda means she can send troops anywhere to do anything, anytime, send the troops into every hedge fund without due process, you know what I'd say then? I'd say that's not how the federal troops work. I don't care what the agenda is.
That would be the kind of answer that we would want, right? That's kind of my point, that if something as basic as constitutional crisis, I don't care if you're writing it down, I don't care if you're reciting it, I don't care if you're spoon feeding it to a baby. It's the bread and butter of being a Supreme Court justice. And I will say this, as a layman, I always say, I'm not a lawyer, I don't play one on television. But if the Supreme Court can rule that racial profiling and using race is okay to randomly kidnap people off the street, but using race as a factor to determine whether or not someone has overcome specific difficulties in order to get into college, that's where race is a problem. But it's okay to pull people off the street for speaking Spanish and hanging out outside of Home Depot. That, to me, is a crisis.
Well, as of this hour, Donald Trump remains silent. Donald Trump is silent about the worst thing that happened to him today. The House Oversight Committee, following a lead that Carson Ro Khanna, who will join us tonight, picked up from a guest on this program, attorney Bradley Edwards, obtained through a subpoena to the Epstein estate the 50th birthday book of sex trafficker and child rapist and friend of Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein. When the Wall Street Journal first reported the existence of the birthday book on July 17th, Donald Trump sued the Wall Street Journal and included in the official pleadings of his lawsuit what we tonight know were lies. Donald Trump said that the birthday letter to Jeffrey Epstein bearing his signature did not exist. His lawsuit called it, quote, the non-existent letter. Lawyers are not supposed to put lies in writing in legal pleadings, and good lawyers never do. By now, the world knows that the letter that Donald Trump, in effect, swore under oath in his lawsuit does not exist, not only exists, but it's now been seen around the world, and it appears exactly the way the Wall Street Journal first described in the very first news report about the letter, which did not include at the time in the Journal actually showing a copy of the letter. Here is the letter, which the Wall Street Journal described this way in its first report on July 17th. Quote, the letter bearing Trump's name, which was reviewed by the Journal, is bawdy. Like others in the album, it contains several lines of typewritten text framed by the outline of a naked woman, which appears to be hand-drawn with a heavy marker. A pair of small arcs denotes the woman's breasts, and the future president's signature is a squiggly Donald below her waist, mimicking pubic hair. Inside the outline of the naked woman was a typewritten note styled as an imaginary conversation between Trump and Epstein, written in the third person. Donald, we have certain things in common. Jeffrey. Jeffrey, yes, we do, come to think of it. Donald, enigmas never age. Have you noticed that? Jeffrey, as a matter of fact, it was clear to me the last time I saw you. Donald, a pal is a wonderful thing. Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret. The Donald signed letter to Jeffrey Epstein is no longer a wonderful secret. The signature on the birthday note does look like Donald Trump's signature. Donald Trump has not yet denied that it is his signature, but it became the official White House position today that that is not Donald Trump's signature. The vice president of the United States used profanity back in July when attacking the Wall Street Journal and demanding on social media at the time an answer to the urgent question, where is the letter? Today, when the letter was produced, the vice president's response in writing was, no one is falling for this BS. Well, okay, Mr. Vice President, but you could have at least acknowledged that your eager question, where is the letter, has been answered. No Trump White House press secretary has ever gotten through a day without lying, and today the White House press secretary's job was to say that the release of the letter, quote, proves this entire birthday card story is false. It's very clear President Trump did not draw this picture and he did not sign it. The Wall Street Journal, in its report today, included an analysis of the public evidence of Donald Trump's artistic drawing style over the years, as well as his frequent choice of language, which includes some of the language in the birthday note, including the word enigma, which Donald Trump has proven in the past that he does actually know. And the Wall Street Journal produced signatures on other Trump notes that do look like the signature in the birthday book letter. At the same time, a deputy White House chief of staff was given the job of posting on social media a few examples of Donald Trump's signature that actually do look like the signature in the birthday book. But the White House social media post says it is not his signature. So the strategy there is to show Trump supporters signatures that look like Donald Trump's signature, but insist they don't look like Donald Trump's signature, so the Trump supporters will think they don't look like Donald Trump's signature. The White House has good reason to believe that a significant portion of Trump supporters will refuse to believe their eyes if Donald Trump or someone working for Donald Trump tells them to refuse to believe their eyes. And as I told Rachel, I have my own entry to offer in the Trump handwriting samples. In the second week of January in 2016, I got my one and only note from Donald Trump. It was a handwritten note, and he signed it, "Best wishes, Donald." Just the first name, just like the birthday letter. It was a very friendly note that I received from Donald, as he put it, Donald Trump. And it was almost generous, and I say almost generous because it included a contribution to my favorite charity. But the check Donald Trump sent me was from the Donald J. Trump Foundation, which we now know was operating so fraudulently that it is no longer allowed to operate in the state of New York and has been disbanded. The Donald J. Trump Foundation, according to an investigation by Attorney General Letitia James, was filled with money that did not come from Donald Trump. And so if Donald Trump made a rare contribution from the Donald J. Trump Foundation, it usually wasn't his money. The Trump check that he sent was for $10,000. It was from the Donald J. Trump Foundation. And on the show that night, I told the story of receiving the check from a presidential candidate and how surprised I was that it came from someone who up to that moment had been publicly attacking me for 5 years, first for calling him a liar in 2011 when he opened his mouth about President Obama's birth certificate, and many times after that. By the time Donald Trump's friendly note arrived with that check, he'd already called me in various tweets one of the dumber people on television, dopey, a fool, and many more such things. And back when I was accurately predicting the exact day when Donald Trump would announce that he was not running for president against President Obama in 2012, Donald Trump tweeted, "Lawrence will soon be off TV, bad ratings. He has a face made for radio." Donald Trump was actually privately urging NBC to get rid of me in those days. And so the friendly note came as a surprise in January 2016 from someone who I didn't know and who I believed hated me. And on the show that night, I read my response to Donald Trump about receiving that note. And I just said that I said in a letter to Donald Trump that I wrote on the show that I couldn't accept, of course, any kind of contribution or pass on any kind of contribution from a presidential candidate. Given that I report on presidential candidates, I asked him, "I hope you understand this predicament." And then, of course, I, in the end, said, in the meantime, because I was diverting this contribution, I myself would replace the Trump check with a $10,000 check of my own that I then gave to my favorite charity. And so here is tonight's entry in the Trump signature sweepstakes. This is a copy of what I sent. When he sent me this, we made a copy, but I sent this, put it back in the envelope it came in, and sent it back to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's note to me appears in the memo section of the check. And there is the signature to the note, which is just that word Donald. Just Donald, that very friendly signature. And then the full formal signature, Donald J. Trump, below that on the check. And so now, from this Donald right here, we're going to lift this Donald right here, the one-word signature, and put it on the screen. It's going to appear on the screen below the signature that appears on the Epstein birthday letter. Now, obviously, they are different magnifications of those signatures and different thickness, possibly to the writing implement at the time. But you'll see all the basic shapes are exactly the same. All of the grand strokes are exactly the same. Those two signatures are more alike than any two exemplars of my signature, which varies day to day and signature to signature. But we will leave it to you, the handwriting experts in the audience, to make tonight's judgment about just how similar those strikingly similar signatures appear to be.